I heard them counting my money while they thought I was asleep. That was the first truth of that night. Sharp, humiliating, cold as the draft sliding beneath the front door of my living room. At 79, people assume you sleep deeply. They think your mind dulls, your senses fade, that you drift into some soft, harmless fog. Mine never did. If anything, age sharpened my hearing, especially when it came to the voices of my own children. I lay still in my recliner, the worn blue blanket pulled to my chin, breathing slow and steady. The lamp was off, the house quiet except for the soft buzz of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock above the hallway door. Then I heard the lock turn. No knocking, no calling out, just letting themselves in. Mark first, then Elise whispering close behind him. Their footsteps slowed when they reached the living room, checking to see if I was in bed. I felt the moment they realized I wasn't. A pause. Then Mark murmured, "She's out here. Good, let's make this quick." Out, as if I were an appliance that had finally powered down. Under the blanket, my fingers moved slowly until they found the small voice recorder my grandson Leo had given me last week. "So you can save your stories, Grandma," he'd said, smiling. I pressed the button and kept my hand still. The tiny red light glowed faintly beneath the fabric. Elise opened the side drawer where I keep my documents. "She won't understand any of this," she whispered. "She barely remembers to lock the door anymore." Not Mom, not Ma, just she. Mark replied quietly, "It's better this way. We'll get her to sign the updated papers tomorrow. She never reads them anyway. Once the house is in both our names, everything else is simple." Papers shuffled. My papers. Elise gave a soft laugh. "Do you know how much she actually has? She eats soup from chipped bowls, while half of this could cover a down payment on a condo." Their shadows crossed the carpet in front of me. They never once looked down, never imagined I might be awake. "Leo won't question anything," Mark added. "He trusts us." My chest tightened, not from tears, but from something heavier, the kind of pain that settles in and turns solid. But I didn't move. My breathing stayed slow, steady, believable. Then Elise said the words that cut deepest. "She's lived long enough. It's not like she needs it." They kept talking, dividing, planning my decline like it was scheduled on a calendar. I heard the zipper of my document pouch, the faint clink of keys as they tried them in my small safe. I listened while my own children rehearsed my disappearance from my own life. When they finally left, the house did not return to peace. It pulsed with awareness, not the fear of an old woman waking from sleep, but the clarity of someone waking from a long mistake. I opened my eyes in the dark and stared at the ceiling. My hand closed around the recorder. For the first time in years, I did not feel fragile. I felt awake. Morning has a way of being honest. Night hides behind shadows and soft edges, but morning stands right in front of you and waits for you to deal with what you already know. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I felt was the ache in my neck from sleeping in the recliner. The second was the weight beneath my ribs. Not fear, not sadness, just recognition. I folded the blanket the way I always do, smoothing the frayed corners. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. They tremble when I thread a needle or read tiny print, but not now, not after hearing my children discuss my life like a set of unused belongings. The kitchen felt colder than usual. I turned on the kettle and stood close to the stove, letting the steam warm my face. The house looked smaller in daylight, more delicate somehow, like it too had heard their whispers in the dark. My late husband used to say, "A home remembers things. It holds laughter, arguments, secrets. Apparently, it holds betrayal, too." I made tea and sat at the small round table by the window. My thoughts didn't drift the way people expect an old woman's to drift. They moved straight to the night before, replaying every word. She never reads them. She won't need it much longer. She always signs. So certain, so comfortable. The clock ticked steadily on the wall. I had no appointments, no errands, no plans. But the hours ahead felt different, shaped somehow, as if a road had quietly opened where none had been before. I reached into the pocket of my robe and took out the recorder, small, silver, warm from being held all night. I placed it on the table between my cup and the sugar bowl. I didn't press play. I didn't need to hear it again to know the truth. A knock sounded at the door, light, hesitant, familiar. Only one person knocks like he's worried he might startle the house. "Grandma, you up?" Leo called. I opened the door, and there he stood, in a wrinkled hoodie, hair sticking up, backpack slung over one shoulder. He smelled faintly of laundry soap and cold air. "You made tea," he said, stepping inside. "Good. I was hoping." "You're early," I said. He shrugged. "Couldn't sleep. Had this feeling I should check on you." Something about that lodged in my chest. Not pain, something softer, being considered without needing to ask. We sat together at the table. He talked about a test he'd passed, about a book he thought I'd like, about a class that was harder than he expected. I listened, smiling, holding my cup with both hands. I didn't tell him about the night, not yet. He was too young to carry that kind of knowledge, and I wasn't ready to put my anger into someone else's heart. Still, he noticed. "You're quieter today," he said gently. "Not sad, just different." "Different can be good," I told him. "Sometimes it means someone finally woke up." He smiled like he didn't quite understand but trusted me anyway. After he left, I stood alone in the kitchen and looked around my life, the faded curtains, the chipped plates, the photos lining the wall. Last night had shaken me, but it had also drawn a line I could no longer pretend wasn't there. Whatever came next, I would not be asleep for it. I didn't play the recording until late afternoon. The day passed with me drifting through the house, touching familiar things as if deciding whether they still belonged to me. Leo's teacup sat in the sink, a faint ring of brown at the bottom. The chair where I'd slept still held the shape of my body. The blanket lay folded neatly over the armrest, just as I'd left it. Nothing looked different. Everything felt different. Finally, I sat at the table, placed the recorder in front of me, and pressed play. Their voices filled the kitchen instantly. Mark's calm certainty, Elisa's sharp whisper, the rustle of paper, the casual way they spoke about my life as if I were already halfway gone. I expected it to hurt more. Instead, it felt like watching rain through a closed window. The fear had already lived inside me long before last night. What I heard now only confirmed what I had refused to name. They hadn't just disrespected me once, they had been preparing for this. "She always signs. She won't understand. She doesn't need it much longer." Not worry, not confusion, planning. I played the recording again, then a third time. By the third time, I stopped hearing the words and started hearing the patterns. The confidence in Mark's voice when he spoke about my signature. The humor in Elisa's laugh when she mentioned my savings. No hesitation, no guilt, just assumption. I turned the recorder off. The quiet pressed in, thick and heavy. I wasn't angry yet. Anger comes hot and fast. What I felt was slower, older, a kind of clear-eyed understanding that settles after years of looking the other way. For decades, I had called it generosity. When Mark needed money for a business that failed within months, I told myself that's what parents do. When Elise borrowed just until next payday, I told myself families support each other. When they brought forms and contracts and insurance updates, I signed because trust felt easier than suspicion. But maybe it wasn't trust. Maybe it was exhaustion. Loving people can make you tired in ways you don't admit, especially when you keep giving and hoping it will eventually be enough. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. Same cars, same lawns, same quiet rhythm of a neighborhood that had grown old along with me. I had lived here more than 40 years. I had built a life in steady, ordinary pieces. And last night, I realized my children only saw the numbers attached to that life, not the work, not the sacrifice, just the total. I went to my bedroom and opened the closet. On the top shelf sat a small metal box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were bank statements, notes my husband had written to himself, and documents I had tucked away and then avoided. I carried the box to the table and laid everything out. For the first time in years, I actually looked. Account numbers, dates, balances, policies. My husband used to say, money is really about control. Who holds it, who depends on it, and who gets to decide. I realized, sitting there in the afternoon light, that I had given Mark and Elise far more control than they had ever earned. Not because they took it, but because I handed it over. By evening, everything was stacked neatly, organized, understood. I wasn't ready to confront anyone yet, but I was no longer confused, and that made all the difference. Mark came by the next afternoon. Not the way people visit someone they love, but the way they check on something they think might be slipping out of their control. He didn't call first. He rarely did anymore. He let himself in, his voice reaching the hallway before he did. "Mom, you up?" Mom. The word sounded strange today, too familiar for a man who had spent the night before planning my future like a budget spreadsheet. I was at the kitchen table, sorting mail I had already opened twice. When he walked in, he paused, studying my face the way people look for cracks in old porcelain. "You look tired," he said. "Rough night?" "I slept fine," I replied. It was true, in its own way. He sat without waiting to be asked and slid a thick envelope onto the table between us, official-looking, heavy with intent. "There are a few papers we need to go over," he said, "just routine updates." Routine. I folded my hands in my lap. What kind of updates? He smiled, the practiced smile he used when explaining things he thought were too complicated for me. "Nothing you need to worry about, just stuff to make things easier for you." "I like to know what I'm signing," I said. The smile flickered. He opened the envelope and pulled out several clipped documents. "This is insurance restructuring, and this one is about streamlining property management. In case something happens, everything will already be in place." "In place for whom?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer. Instead, he pushed the papers toward me and waited. I adjusted my glasses and read. Really read. The language was polite, friendly, carefully constructed to sound like assistance while transferring control piece by piece. Partial ownership now, full authority later. Legal phrasing designed to slide past someone who trusted the person holding the pen. I set the papers down. "This isn't just insurance," I said. "This is property transfer." Mark stiffened. "Mom, you're misunderstanding. This protects you." "It protects you," I replied. His jaw tightened. "You're overthinking this. I'm trying to help." "Then explain every line," I said. He hesitated, just long enough. "I want time to review these with someone who can explain them to me." His frustration rose fast. A lawyer? That's unnecessary. Not to me. The silence stretched between us, thick with something neither of us wanted to maim. Finally, he gathered the papers back into the envelope. Fine, but don't make this harder than it needs to be. I met his eyes calmly. Sometimes things become hard when people stop pretending. He stood, irritation tightening his movements. I'll come back tomorrow. We'll finish this. After he left, the house felt oddly quiet, like it was waiting. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I simply knew something had shifted. The next morning, I woke with a decision already settled inside me. No debate, no doubt. I laid every folder I owned across the kitchen table: bank records, deeds, insurance policies, notes from my husband, years of paperwork I had avoided because it felt overwhelming. Now it felt necessary. By 10 o'clock, I'd dressed, locked the door, and walked slowly to the bus stop. The law office sat near the town library in a modest brick building. I hadn't been there since my husband passed. I need to speak with Mr. Carter today, I told the receptionist. She studied my face, then nodded. I'll see what I can do. When I sat across from him, I didn't start with explanations. I placed the recorder on his desk and pressed play. Mr. Carter listened without interrupting, not once. My children's voices filled the small office, low and confident, planning my future as if it were already past. When the recording ended, he didn't reach for the stop button right away. He simply sat still for a moment, as if letting the weight of it settle. Then he looked at me, not with pity, with respect. "Mrs. Hale," he said gently, "what you've brought me is clear evidence of intent to manipulate your assets. You were right to come here." I nodded. I should have come sooner. "Many people wait until it's too late," he replied. "You didn't." Those words felt like a small door opening. He began explaining my options in calm, careful language, revoking shared access, removing automatic permissions, creating a trust to protect the house and savings, assigning a future beneficiary without giving anyone present control. "You are fully competent," he said plainly. "You can decide exactly how your property is handled." Competent? It sounded like something I had forgotten I was allowed to be. "I want my grandson Leo to inherit, but I don't want him responsible for managing anything right now." "That can be arranged," he said. "We can delay his involvement entirely." "And I want my children removed from all financial authority." He didn't flinch. "That is absolutely your right." He printed forms, highlighted sections, and explained each clause without rushing me. For the first time in years, no one spoke over me. No one simplified things without asking. No one treated me like an inconvenience. When I left his office, the sun was breaking through the clouds. Not bright, not dramatic, just steady. On the way home, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Control. Not over anyone else, over my own life. The next day was quiet, but not empty. I called the bank and revoked every shared permission. They placed immediate holds on all third-party access. I contacted my investment firm and requested account restructuring through the trust. Each call took time. Each required verification. Each closed another door my children had been quietly using for years. By afternoon, everything was moving through legal channels instead of family ones. It felt strange and necessary. That evening, I found the envelope my husband and I had made long ago, the emergency one we promised not to touch unless something truly mattered. Inside was our old will and a note he had written in careful block letters. "Don't let fear make your decisions. Let clarity do that." I held the note for a long time. Then I placed it with the rest of the documents. The following morning, I returned to Mr. Carter's office and signed. trust papers, property protection, financial redirection, legal barriers no one could cross without a judge. My signature did not shake. When it was finished, he closed the folder and said, "Your home and assets are now fully protected." Protected. I went home and sat in my chair, the same one where it all began. I didn't feel angry. I felt settled. But I knew one thing for certain. My children would not accept this quietly, and the hardest conversations were still ahead. Elise came the next morning without calling. She never called first. She assumed I would always be home, always available, always open like a door with a broken lock. I heard her heels on the walkway before she reached the porch, quick, sharp, impatient with the world. When I opened the door, she swept inside with perfume and purpose. "Mom, you look pale. Are you eating? You didn't answer your phone." "I've been busy," I said. She scanned the house the way people do when they're searching for proof that something is wrong. Her eyes landed on the neatly stacked folders on the table. "What's all that?" she asked, already stepping toward them. "Please don't touch them," I said. "They're important." Her hand froze mid-air. Then she smiled, the careful smile she used when she wanted something. "Of course. I just worry about you handling complicated things on your own. You know how overwhelming paperwork gets." "For you," I replied quietly. She sat across from me and smoothed her skirt. "Mark says you're acting strange. He's worried you might be stressed or confused." Confused, such a useful word when someone wants control. "I'm not confused," I said. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Mom, aging is hard. You've always been generous, helping me with the studio, helping Mark with his business, but you don't have to carry everything alone anymore." "Then why does it feel like you're trying to carry it for me?" I asked. Her expression shifted. "We just want what's best for you." "Why are you really here, Elise?" The room went quiet. She hesitated, then sighed. "Mark said you refused to sign some forms. He thinks something scared you. I came to reassure you." "I don't need reassurance," I said. "I need honesty." She stiffened. "That's not fair. We're your children." "Yes," I said, "and you're planning my life without asking me." Her eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" I held her gaze. "You and Mark have been discussing my finances, my house, and what happens when I'm gone, without me." Her mouth opened, then closed. "Mom, we were just talking hypothetically. You were dividing my property while I was in the next room," I said. Her face drained of color. For a moment, she looked like a child caught with something she wasn't supposed to have. Then her expression hardened. "You were listening." "I was awake." She stood abruptly. "That was private." "I was in your house," I said calmly, "using my papers." Her voice rose. "We were trying to protect you." "By taking control?" Silence. She picked up her purse, shaking slightly. "You're being dramatic." "No," I said, "I'm being honest." Her eyes filled, but the tears didn't soften her voice. "You're pushing us away." "I'm stepping back into my own life," I replied. She stared at me as if trying to recognize a version of me that didn't exist anymore. Then she left without saying goodbye. That evening, Leo came by with his easy knock and warm smile. He talked about school, about plans, about nothing important and everything comforting. When he hugged me before leaving, he said, "If you ever need anything, just tell me, okay?" I believed him, and I knew the confrontation with Mark was coming next. They came together the next afternoon. Mark first, stiff and purposeful, and Elise a few steps behind him, arms crossed like she was bracing for impact. I saw their shapes through the frosted glass before they knocked, both standing too straight, like people arriving for a negotiation instead of a visit. I opened the door before they could ring. "Mom," Mark said, "we need to talk." They walked straight to the kitchen and sat without waiting to be asked, the way people do when they believe they already own the conversation. Mark placed a thin folder on the table. "We're concerned. You've been making changes without telling us." "The bank shouldn't have told you anything," I replied. He paused, just long enough. "Well, they did," he said, "and it tells me something isn't right." "What isn't right," I said calmly, "is you expecting access to things that don't belong to you." Elise leaned forward. "We're not trying to take anything. We're trying to keep the family stable." "The family or yourselves?" I asked. Mark opened the folder and slid papers toward me. "These give us temporary authority, just to help manage things. It's practical." "Practical for who?" I asked again. Elise spoke softly. "Mom, please, you're making this harder than it needs to be." I didn't touch the papers. "I've already made arrangements," I said. Mark's face tightened. "What kind of arrangements?" "Legal ones." Silence hit the room like a dropped plate. "You went to a lawyer?" Elise whispered. "Yes." Mark pushed his chair back slightly. "Without talking to us?" "I didn't need permission." His voice sharpened. "You're making permanent decisions without understanding the consequences." "I understand them very well," I said. Elise stood. "So what, you don't trust us now?" "I trusted you for years," I replied, "and that trust was used, not respected." Mark exhaled hard. "We were helping you." "By planning for my death?" I asked. Neither of them answered. Mark finally said, "You're overreacting." "No," I said quietly, "I'm responding." Elise's voice broke. "You're tearing this family apart." I shook my head. "I'm refusing to let it be taken apart quietly." Mark stood. "Fine. If you won't listen to us, we can't help you when things go wrong." "I didn't ask you to," I said. They left angry, confused, and unprepared for the truth that they were no longer in control. That night, I allowed myself to cry. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the quiet release of years of pretending everything was fine. And when the tears ended, something steadier took their place. Resolve. The next morning, I woke with a calm I hadn't felt in years. Not relief, not happiness, just steadiness. I made tea, buttered toast, and sat at the kitchen table while sunlight crept across the floor. The folders waited where I'd left them, stacked neatly, patient. I dressed with care. Nothing fancy, just the navy cardigan that made me feel like myself. Small choices matter when the big ones are already made. The taxi ride to Mr. Carter's office passed quietly. Outside the window, life continued without noticing that something important was happening in a small brick building near the library. Mr. Carter greeted me with a nod. "Are you ready?" "Yes," I said. He spread the documents across the desk, walking me through each section again. Trust establishment, asset protection, revocation of prior permissions, healthcare directives. Every line existed to make sure no one could quietly step in and take over my life. I read everything. Then I signed. Each signature felt like closing a door that should have been shut years ago. When it was done, he closed the folder. "Your property and finances are now legally protected. No one can override these decisions without court involvement." "Good," I said. Outside, the air felt lighter, not because my family problems were solved, but because my safety no longer depended on anyone's goodwill. At home, the house felt different. Not safer. Mine. I sent one message in the family group chat. "Come by tomorrow afternoon. We need to talk." No explanations, no arguments, just a statement. Leo texted later asking if I was okay. I told him yes and that I'd explain soon. That night, I slept in my bed, not in the chair, and I slept deeply. They arrived tense. Mark walked in first, shoulders tight, jaw already set for an argument. Elise followed, gripping her purse like she expected to need it as armor. They stopped when they saw Leo sitting at the table with a cup of tea. "You invited him?" Mark asked sharply. I invited everyone, I said. Sit if you'd like. Leo looked between us, uncertain. I can leave if... No, I said. You should hear this too. I walked to the sideboard, opened the drawer, and took out the recorder. Mark's face changed instantly. Elise went still. What's that? She asked, though she already knew. I placed it on the table and pressed play. Their voices filled the kitchen, clear, undeniable, planning, laughing, assuming. Leo stared at the tabletop, his hands slowly tightening into fists. Mark stood. Turn that off. I will, I said, after it finishes. Elise covered her mouth. When the recording ended, no one spoke. Mark finally said, That was taken out of context. I was awake, I replied. There is no other context. Elise whispered, Mom, we didn't mean it like that. Like what? I asked. Like deciding my life without me? Mark rubbed his face. We were trying to help. You were trying to take control, I said. Leo looked up. Dad, how could you talk about Grandma like that? Mark didn't answer. I placed the legal folders on the table. Everything is settled. The house and accounts are protected. Neither of you has authority anymore. Elise gasped softly. You really did it? Yes. Mark stared at the papers as if they had betrayed him. You didn't have to go this far. I did, I said, because you went farther. Silence again. Elise asked quietly, So what now? Now, I said, you can be my children, not my managers. Mark stood abruptly. You don't trust us. I trusted you longer than I should have, I replied. Now I trust myself. They left without shouting, without apologies, just stunned. Leo stayed. After the door closed, he said softly, I'm sorry. This isn't yours to carry, I told him. He nodded, eyes bright. You were brave. I smiled faintly. No, I was tired of being quiet. After they left, the house felt strangely calm, not empty, cleansed. I stood in the middle of the kitchen for a long moment, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock, the quiet sounds that had kept me company for decades. These walls had heard laughter, grief, arguments, birthdays, and now truth. I made tea again. It seemed to be what I did when my heart needed time to catch up with my mind. I carried the cup to the living room and sat in the same chair where everything had begun, the quilt resting across my knees. For a moment, I let myself feel the sadness I'd been holding back, not because my children had tried to take from me, but because they had stopped seeing me. That loss settles deeper. Yet beneath the sadness, something else existed, something steady and quiet, dignity. I hadn't shouted, I hadn't begged, I hadn't given in. I had simply stood where I belonged. Leo texted later that night, Still thinking about today. I'm proud of you. I smiled at the screen longer than I needed to. Not all love fades into entitlement. Some love remains kind. As evening deepened, I opened the window slightly and let cool air move through the room. The street outside looked the same as it always had, but I didn't. For years, I had shaped my days around other people's needs, convinced that was what good mothers did. But goodness doesn't require surrender. It requires honesty. And tonight, honesty had finally made space for peace. The days that followed were quieter. Not the uncomfortable kind of quiet, but the kind that settles in after a storm when you realize the wind has stopped and nothing is about to fall. Mark didn't call. Elise sent one short message. Hope you're okay. No questions, no visits. I wasn't surprised. People who lose control rarely rush back to offer understanding. Instead, I built a new routine. Mornings with tea by the window, short walks when the weather allowed, reading books I had meant to open for years but never felt I had the time for. I started going to the community center on Wednesdays just to sit among people who didn't expect anything from me except conversation. It felt strange at first, choosing things simply because I wanted them. I had spent so long responding to other people's needs that I had forgotten how to listen to my own. Leo visited often. He didn't bring questions about the family. He brought stories, snacks, and laughter. He helped me reset a stubborn clock and teased me about keeping every greeting card I'd ever received. "You're sentimental," he said. "I'm grateful," I replied. Some evenings I still felt the ache. Not regret. Grief. Grief for the family I thought I had and the one I actually did. But grief, I learned, doesn't mean you made the wrong choice. It means you cared deeply before you chose yourself. And caring deeply is not a flaw. One afternoon, I found an old photo while sorting through a drawer. Mark and Elise as children, standing in the yard with scraped knees and crooked smiles, holding popsicles that were already melting. I didn't put the picture away. I set it on the shelf where I could see it, not to remind myself of what they'd done, but to remember what once was. Love and boundaries can exist in the same space. It took me decades to learn that. Strength doesn't always look the way people expect it to. It doesn't shout. It doesn't threaten. Sometimes it simply stays. I felt that kind of strength growing quietly in my days, not because everything was perfect, but because I had stopped pretending that comfort mattered more than truth. I no longer waited for Mark's visits or Elise's calls. If they came, I would welcome them. If they didn't, I would not shrink around their absence. That was new, and it felt like freedom. At the community center, I met women who carried their own stories of loss and reinvention, widows, divorcees, mothers who had learned the hard way that love does not always return what you give. We talked about recipes and aches and grandchildren, but sometimes, quietly, we talked about choosing ourselves. I realized I wasn't unusual. I was just late to the lesson. One evening, Leo asked me, "Do you regret telling them the truth?" I thought about that. Regret is what grows when you silence yourself, not when you finally speak. "No," I said, "I regret waiting so long to believe I was allowed to protect myself." He smiled. "You taught me that." That surprised me. All those years I thought I was just keeping peace, and yet here he was, learning something better from my refusal. Sometimes the lesson arrives late, but it still arrives in time for someone else. I slept better, not because my problems were gone, but because they no longer lived unspoken in the corners of my house. The air felt cleaner, even my memories felt lighter. People imagine victory as something loud. Apologies spoken in trembling voices, tears that cleanse every wound, families returning to old patterns as if nothing ever broke. But real victory is usually quiet. It looks like making tea without checking your phone, like sitting in your own chair without waiting for permission, like choosing peace even when reconciliation would cost your dignity. That was the kind of victory I lived in now. Some afternoons I still found myself listening for footsteps on the porch. Old habits don't disappear quickly. Years of waiting don't vanish overnight. But when no one came, I no longer felt the sharp, hollow ache I once did. I felt space, room to breathe. I filled that space slowly, with walks around the block, with long books and shorter naps, with conversations that weren't about money or favors or just one more thing. I stopped apologizing for needing rest. I stopped explaining my choices. And nothing terrible happened. Life did not collapse because I finally stood still in it. One afternoon, I planted flowers near the front step, Nothing dramatic, just bright little things that caught the sunlight. A neighbor stopped to comment on them, and we talked for 10 minutes about soil and weather and nothing important at all. It felt good, simple, human. I realized then that I hadn't just protected my finances, I had protected my time. And time at my age is the most valuable thing there is. Leo continued to visit, always bringing stories and laughter and that easy kindness that reminded me some hearts remain generous even when others grow guarded. Once, as he helped me hang a picture frame, he said, "You seem lighter, Grandma." I thought about that. I think I finally stopped carrying things that were never mine to carry. He nodded as if that made perfect sense. Maybe it did. I didn't know what the future held for my relationship with Mark and Elise. Maybe one day they would return ready to speak honestly. Maybe they wouldn't. I had stopped predicting outcomes that depended on other people changing. What I knew was this: I had not lost my family. I had simply stopped letting them define me. There is a difference, and recognizing that difference felt like stepping out of a long shadow into quiet sunlight. The house had a rhythm again, not the anxious rhythm of waiting, but the steady breathing of a place that knew it was safe. I sat in my armchair one late afternoon, the same chair where I had pretended to sleep while my children divided my life in whispers. The quilt rested across my legs, soft and familiar. Outside, the branches swayed gently in the breeze, their shadows moving slowly across the floor. Nothing dramatic had happened since that day, and that was the point. Life didn't need to explode for it to change. It just needed honesty. I thought about the past weeks, the recorder, the lawyer's office, the papers I signed, the confrontation that stripped away illusions I had carried for years. I thought about the tears I let fall in private and the calm that followed them. Most of all, I thought about the woman I had been before all this. So careful, so accommodating, so afraid of upsetting anyone. And I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't weaker then. I was just tired of choosing everyone else first. Age doesn't only take from you. Sometimes it gives you permission. Permission to stop pretending. Permission to stop shrinking. Permission to decide that the life you still have is worth protecting. My phone chimed softly on the table beside me. A message from Leo. "Just checking in. Love you, Grandma." I smiled and typed back, "I'm doing just fine, sweetheart. Love you too." Then I set the phone down and listened to the house, not for footsteps, not for voices, just for myself. For the sound of breathing, for the quiet certainty that I was exactly where I was meant to be. People say old age is about letting go, but I think it's also about holding on to your dignity, to your voice, to the right to say no. I had not lost my family. I had simply stopped disappearing inside them, and that made all the difference. The sun slipped lower in the sky, painting the walls in soft gold. I closed my eyes, not to hide, not to pretend, but to rest. Not as someone fading, but as someone finally awake, still here, still whole. And that was enough.